Welcome to the AlphaMind podcast, hosted by Stephen Goldstein and Mark Randall. The podcast which is always looking to help traders, whether they're new to the game or whether they are seasoned and experienced traders, explore how they can be better, more productive, more effective traders by looking at the human aspects of trading performance. The AlphaMind podcast proudly partners with the esteemed Society of Technical Analysts, a distinguished not-for-profit organisation dedicated to providing informative and educational resources for its members. We're excited to announce that their upcoming second Technicals to Trading Systems one-day conference in London, featuring an array of exceptional speakers, will be held on Tuesday the 16th of April. This offers both in-person attendance, where you can take part in fantastic networking opportunities with like-minded people, or you can view it online. Visit the STA website at technicalanalyst.com for further details and registration. Furthermore, we're thrilled to endorse the STA's outstanding home study course. As a special offer for AlphaMind podcast listeners, you can enjoy a £100 discount on this exceptional program, crafted by world-renowned technical analysis experts. Visit our website at alpha-mind.net to learn more and take advantage of this exclusive opportunity. Now, on with this week's podcast.
Well, a very warm welcome to this week's AlphaMind podcast. We're delighted to have Louise Bedford on. Louise, partner to Chris Tate, who was a guest on our 15th AlphaMind podcast in the early days. And of course, now 130 odd episodes later, we have Louise with us. And Louise has been in the market for over 30 years, trained thousands of people. She's a behavioural finance expert, a degree in psychology and business, has done all the hard yards of frontline experience in principally the equity market, but the story is much broader than that in terms of what she does. She runs the longest running continuous trading mentor program in the world with partner Chris Tate as well, and also as a best-selling author. And I think there's a new book coming, and I think we'll talk about that as part of this podcast. So, Louise, welcome to the show. What's going on? I know you're into trading psychology. I'm going to give you a question to start with.
Go on, let's kick off.
What is trading psychology?
I think of it as psychological fitness, where you are looking to improve your fitness, your flexibility, and your strength in your mind so that you can weather the storms that the markets throw at us. There is no doubt the markets can be very confusing. They give ambiguous signals. Sometimes we'll be winning, sometimes we'll be losing, sometimes it's got nothing to do with us. It can just be the market conditions. So being able to weather those storms and being able to excel in that environment is so important, and that's why trading psychology is the key.
Brilliant. I'm going to ask that question to Steve Goldstein now. Okay. Your lens and your experience, what do you see?
So it's a great answer from Louise, and I think it often, the way we frame the answer to this often depends on our background. So obviously my background is trading. I was a trader for 25 years. And I see the answer slightly differently, although effectively it's the same. I think of it as trading performance. I like to look at it holistically as it's completely interconnected with everything we do when we're trading. So sometimes I find, and I was guilty of this when I was a trader, of looking for the answer in psychology. In effect, to me, that was an answer that was out there, okay, when actually the answer was within me. And I worked on what I would call my psychology rather than trading psychology. Of course, I understood a lot. I learned a lot about the external psychology, but I had to bring it back to myself. But there was a danger at one point, and I think for much of my early half of my career, where I was looking at it in academic terms, not always applying it to me. So I think that's why I like to sort of wrap it up into this kind of trader performance. I suppose you could sort of label.
Yeah, it's broad, isn't it? I do think there are several times when psychology is the most important. You do definitely have to have a system that's robust enough to give you results in the market, but you also have to run that system yourself. Stay loyal to the signals, stay loyal to your trading plan, but also flexible enough so that you can make improvements as time goes on. Because definitely, if you're not looking at your results and you're not altering and course correcting, that can be a problem as well. Just because something worked 15 years ago doesn't mean it's going to work continually forever. As trend followers, we do have certain characteristics that do display themselves time and time again. But definitely being able to have that introspection to question ourselves, I think, is genius.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I just want to actually throw that before you jump in there, Mark.
That's right. I mean, now, aren't you?
I'm going to throw it at you, because it's terrific. Because if you ask 100 people this question, I think you will get 100 slightly different answers.
Yeah, I was sort of why I positioned it. I thought it was quite an interesting starting point. But mine began through necessity of dealing with trauma, where you suddenly realised that you had a psychological state you needed to manage, and that it was manageable. And so my trigger point was, a stupidly busy futures guy in the 80s, fainting attacks, panic attacks, having to run away from closed environments. And it wasn't because of anything other than the fact that I guess that this stress that I wasn't managing. I thought it was normal to have that level of stress, but no one was saying, "Can I help you?" But I actually had to show some degree of vulnerability of finding an answer to then follow a pathway that actually did me good for 30, 40 years, and then the current day of me having a process of managing the mental state of me. And I think for me it was around having a toolkit to manage the ups and downs of your state during trading, some of it very difficult, and actually having a recovery process. So, and that fits back into performance. I think performance is really, really important, but if you're going to be into this world of performance, you need a method of recovery, because you're going to get knocked. And the speed of your recovery is where your edge comes from, because a lot of other people are going to be in similar states. But if you can recover quicker, get back on process quicker, be back aware to what's going on in real time, faster than anybody else, I think this goes into the sports world as well, then you have an amazing edge. So yeah, that's...
Just following on from that point, and it's really interesting how we've got three slightly different angles on this. I just wanted to repeat a tweet I saw this morning from one of our favourite guests, Pax Trader.
Our second favourite guest, of course.
Of course, he did two outstanding podcasts with us a couple of years ago, and he talked about some of his own struggles. And he put out a tweet last night saying, "I get a lot of DMs from traders that are struggling." His handle is Pax Trader 777. If you want to have a look at it, he said, "Today I had a trader reach out that is suicidal. Life is tough, sometimes unrelating. No matter how bad it is for you, it can get better." And then he sort of gave out a number for him to call to help him. And this really does get down to the nut of it. When I worked as a trader, I remember people we heard stories of traders in other firms who had committed suicide. And Mark tells of his time working on the life floor. Some traders committed suicide, but some went down a road where they kind of effectively committed suicide. What's the story we tell when we're at some of our workshops?
Well, I won't position it in any particular market, but I knew of 15 people under the age of 55 that died a lot sooner than they should have died. And actually, it's having a conversation, and that was from the world of my world of futures, from my lens. And actually, when we were talking to it was Pax Trader in his podcast, I think in the podcast with him, even before we talked about it, he said, "Yeah, God, I know about 20 dudes that have, and I know men principally, that had died early." And I don't know whether any of it was suicidal, but certainly going on to the wrong route of self-management. It was. I guess it was a lot of it was alcohol. It may have been the wrong type of drugs.
And you do have to question, are the people who are experiencing that level of extreme difficulty, is the reason why they got into trading because they like that high risk environment? Were they positioned to have that predisposition prior to getting into trading, and trading just became the conduit, the lens through which they saw everything? What are your thoughts, Mark?
Yeah, it's sort of possible, but some people got in by accident rather than by design. It just became the job they did, and to some extent, I think the trading world wasn't quite so much a 9 to 5 job in the early days of trading, but it wasn't far off. The market globalized later on, and exchanges and access made it a 24/7 market. So I think it became a bigger problem. But I think a lot of people that started when we started, it was kind of like you had a job. It was just like that's my job. And I did trading, I did broking or whatever. That was my job. And I think that's quite a different thing to people in the retail space, where it's a chosen sort of pathway that may not be their job. And I think we have to be careful about who we ask that question toward. Because I think luckily if you're thrown into it, as myself and Steve were, you kind of mature with the market, and perhaps you had a better chance of surviving. If you've jumped into it blindly because you want your Lamborghini, which unfortunately is a bit of a problem out there, then you're going from not knowing anything about it to having to get involved with it immediately without any protection and any life history of how you deal with it. I think that can create problems. And certainly whenever we've talked about trauma in any podcast episode, if you look at the numbers, it's those episodes that gain a hell of a lot of people that listen. Okay, so if you talk about performance in one shape, yeah, people listen. You start talking about the trauma of it, then the listening starts to spike, and that tells you that out there in the 90% of the people failing in the retail space trying to trade the market, that there are people having problems, as Steve alluded to. That there's people out there facing, because perhaps they've not gone in with, they've gone to war without thinking about a defense mechanism. They've just gone to war without, actually, but you need to protect yourself, and how do you recover from the shocks that are going to happen? If you've not thought about that, then your chance of failure becomes greater.
Yes. And Steve, you've definitely been mastering the mental game of trading, there's no doubt. I would love to hear your thoughts about how traders can beat the odds and come out as a success.
Okay, so it's a fascinating question. Now, let's start looking at the odds. So I was at a summit last week in Vancouver, put on by the behavioural traders community. Okay, and at the summit there was a talk by a psychologist. Her name was Creed. Okay, she was from Ireland. She's a former sports psychologist, and in her talk she put out a statistic that the odds of succeeding in trading are 1%. Now, I'd come to the same conclusion, and I think it turned out that I was using the same source of information, some research done on day traders in the Taiwanese stock exchange. Now, there's certain things that increase the odds and shift the odds. Okay, working with a mentor, working with a teacher, working with a trainer, working in an organisation such as a prop firm or investment bank. I remember reading or hearing in one of our early podcasts, we had a guest on. He wrote a book called Bite the Arse Off a Bear.
That's a great name.
Yeah, he's a hedge fund manager. I'm terrible with names, so it's going to come to me in a minute. But he told the story of when he first joined Merrill Lynch as a junior trader. and they had a talk by the head of trading at the firm, and he said that the name came from that talk, because he said, if you're not ready to come in and bite the arse off a bear every single morning, you're not going to make it. And he said, I guarantee you, in 5 years' time, 90% of you won't be in this job anymore. So even in a firm like Merrill Lynch, where you've got all the edges, and the odds of success go down to about...
As Garth Friesen was...
Garth Friesen, yes, the great Garth Friesen.
There we go.
So I think, if you increase those odds, I've seen people say, they've run statistics where they've said that when people have a mentor in a prop firm, the odds go up to about 4%. Okay, so we know the odds are against us, and most people get eliminated in the first year or two. So I think if you get past that second year, your odds significantly increase, although they're still, they're not guaranteed. If you get past 5 years, it gets so much better. But you've got to do something to change those odds around. Okay?
Yes.
You've got to find a successful strategy. You've got to understand the market. Okay, those two are not that difficult to learn. They're quite easy. Okay, there's lots of systems out there. There's lots of methods out there. They're not that complicated. Learning about the market happens with time, but you can learn the basics pretty quickly. Okay, the biggest challenge is the self-challenge. That's the ultimate challenge. That's why most people fail. Okay, they don't work on themselves. Now, it took me 13 years to learn that. Okay, I survived 13 years. Okay, I had a couple of good years in that time. May have been luck. Okay, but I started in an investment bank, which definitely helps as well. I found some good trading approaches to start with, but they disappeared over time. The market wears away. Environments change. You have to adapt with them. You have to learn new methods. I got to a point in my career where after 13 years, I was thinking, I'm not going to last much longer in this. I've got to find something else to do. I'd really lost my confidence and lost my way. And then I worked with a coach, and that coach introduced me to me. Okay, he started getting me to look inward, to reflect, rather than see the answers as out there. The answers were in here, and I started changing. Okay, I started focusing much more on how I was as a risk taker, because the game is risk. It's not analysis. It's not systems. It's taking risk. It's managing risk. It's running risk. It's exiting risk. It's letting go of that journey through risk and coming back and then doing it again the next day, the next week, the next month, the next year. The game is risk. We all learn, and for the first 13 years of my career, I was trying to be an analyst more than a trader. Okay? I thought the answers lied in my analysis. After that, and after I learned about myself and reflected, I started focusing on myself as a risk taker. I actually became a trader. And after that, I rediscovered my love and passion for trading. I started making a lot of money. I went on an amazing journey of self-discovery that's still going on today. Okay. And, that changed everything for me. But I had to look inwards. Okay. When I look at some of the really great traders I know, they do that. They reflect an awful lot. They look inwards. I have these incredible deep conversations with some phenomenal traders.
Just stepping in here for a second to tell you about my new book, Mastering the Mental Game of Trading. Now, this book has been reviewed by quite a few leading figures in the markets, and they've left some outstanding comments. Brent Donnelly, author of The Alpha Trader and the Art of Currency Trading, called it one of the most important trading books in years. Mike Bellafore, what I love about this book from Stephen is that it helps you sharpen your mental game by sharing entertaining and enlightening real-world stories from his 25 years of trading experience. And Linda Rashke said, I could read it once a month, it is that enjoyable. Mastering the Mental Game of Trading is available in paperback,
Kindle and Audible, and can be bought at Amazon and all good book retailers. Now back to the podcast.
And I want to pick up on that as well, because that introspective step is something that a lot of people miss. And also, Mark, where you were talking about trauma and the impact of our past experiences and what that can do to our current trading, there's a couple of things that come to mind. One is an ACE childhood. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that term, but it's adverse childhood experiences, ACE. Now, unfortunately, for people who have had some form of adverse child experience, it represents as trauma in the adult, which means there can be flashbacks. There can be an interruption to the objective processing of information because the past comes into play. And there can also be some very subjective decisions being made. And of course, these are the types of things as a trader we need to avoid. So I'm tempted to suggest to you, based on the research that I've done, a method that can cover both, Steve, your view of introspection, and Mark, your concerns about trauma. If I could give you a method of marrying those two, would you be interested in hearing about that?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
The stage is yours.
So I'd like to suggest that the cheapest therapy you'll ever get is by analysing your own issues. But of course, we're not very good at that because we have all sorts of things that stand in the way, particularly our ego. Now, I'm referring to the work of James Pennebaker, who was a university psychologist, and he looked at his students, how to heal them from trauma, how to get them over some terrible life experiences. What can he do to move the needle so that those life experiences didn't follow those students for the rest of their days, let alone into their career? Now, he came up with a way of studying this. He got a control group, of course, because we always need to do that for good science, but he also had the people who'd been through trauma as a way of being able to relinquish that control the trauma had on them, to write down their experiences. Now, I've adapted that work for traders. Now, it's the same type of idea. It isn't easy, and Mark, unfortunately, it does involve reliving some of that trauma. But what I've found with members of my mentor program that I run with my business partner, Chris Tate, and I've been running that for the last 24 years, this method actually helps that grip, that firm hold that the trauma has over the trader. It helps to relinquish that pain. So I'd like to suggest this to you. Now, James, when he did this research, he got those students to write down their most revolting trauma and all of their thoughts, and there were tears and there was gnashing of teeth. And then the next day, write about it again, but you weren't allowed to write about the exact same aspects. You had to choose new aspects. And he measured them over time, those students, and gradually positive words replaced the negative words. So what we're talking about in terms of, like, if you like, a rate of change indicator, their rate of change in terms of that negative thought process, it was lessening over time. So as a trader, and this is something I'd suggest people do, if you're recovering from a big loss or a big trauma, or if it's something that you feel is really making an impact, day one, write down exactly what's bothering you in excruciating detail. Let all of those emotions go. Don't hold back. Embrace those strong feelings and get it out on paper. Then, after you've done that, shift your focus on day two and reflect on what you did well in that situation. So allow yourself to realize that in every revolting circumstance, there are some aspects that you have been able to manage and you've been able to take control over, even in the most dire of circumstances. Day three, dive into those emotions around the trauma again, but only cover any lingering pain that you haven't already covered. Don't allow yourself just to repeat and repeat and repeat, because that gets into a rumination cycle, and we know that rumination is a precursor for anxiety and increasing our levels of depression. So we want to cover new topics, because you've already blabbed, you've already thought about what you do well, now you're looking for other things that are painful. Then day 4, have a look from a new perspective. What were the lessons that you learned from this trauma? Now, I'm even thinking personal trauma. So if perhaps there's abuse, for example, you can still do this. And it's still possible to think, what could be gained from this? What are the lessons that you learned? Even if that lesson happens to be not to trust that particular type of person again. That is a lesson. Day 5, shift your focus into self-care. Think about what you can do to look after yourself and to protect yourself. Treat yourself like you're a toddler. Think about what would make you feel comfortable and warm and soothed. Think about the things that you can do to increase your self-reliance, because you are feeling safe and you are feeling comfortable. You see, confidence expands us. Fear makes us shrink. So with this, self-care is so important. Day 6, have a look into the future. Imagine your life 5 years into the future and look back on where you are now and when the trauma occurred. Get that future perspective. Find a way of future pacing, as it's called. And day 7, review everything that you've done so far. And that review process does summon that ability to be introspective. It helps you not only see the trauma from a more detached way, but it allows you to see, are there positives that came out of that trauma, or that loss in the market, or that pain you went through, or that broken heart? Are there positives that you can derive out of this, so that you can allow those positives to shape you into the person you want to be? I'd love to hear your thoughts, Mark, because I know you were more touching on trauma. Tell me your thoughts about that process.
Very interesting process. I think, in fact, you've shared that, and it's very valuable. I found the need when I was starting to sort of position mind fitness programs for trading community. I sort of worked a little bit of HR, and there was a point where I actually thought we needed something to identify, even something as simple that gets stuck on your mind. You just can't let go. It tends to be negative or out-date memories that just keep getting in the way. And so this concept of letting go, we factored into the build out of what became an extension of mindfulness into visualization journeys, where actually in a state of relaxation, I take people on a journey across a sort of beautiful garden, various aspects, and they feel that they are there. And I take them down into, in one version of it, sort of an underground sort of cavern, as it were, with a lake, and before they get into this sort of this turquoise blue warm water, there's a table with 3 pieces of paper on the pen, and they are to describe these things that are on their mind that they want to get rid of, they want to park, and I get them to wade into this pool and get them to float, and they carry in these 3 bits of paper which are made out of an Alka-Seltzer material that they then throw into the water, that then start to bubble and disappear. And they sense an energy change from negative to positive that they start to absorb in this very relaxed state. Now, when we started this, we thought, well, how many people are going to get to this? The number of people that say, yeah, I was there, I let go of this, I identified it, I let go of it, I feel refreshed, I feel reset, I feel much more positive. It was incredible. But so I think the visualization, and that was a 7-minute discipline. And the message was that if you have more than 3 things that you want to identify, you can always come back. So it gave people a kind of a lifeboat type sense. And I think if you feel that you've got a lifeboat to deal with lumps and bumps, then actually your confidence tends to increase. You tend to be a lot more positive about things. And I think so this identification in however way you feel is appropriate for you of the thing that's on your mind, but then actually having the process to do something about it is really, really important. And then actually making that part of your, just the things you do. And I used that for years and nobody knew I was using it. And people would say to me, how the hell are you so bloody calm when chaos is breaking out? And if I described this stuff in the 90s, nobody have understood it. They'd have thought I was a freak. But actually, in the year 2010, we revealed it, and actually, with some risk, but actually, it then got into the business. And of course, it's just a lot of stuff that Steve and I now do as part of our process of ecosystem optimization of the trader space through some of our workshops and some of our coaching. So I think it is really, really valuable to have something. And I guess we're all different, so it may be as easy as Tom Camfield, who had this massive shock in one of our podcasts that he revealed about losing $500,000 in seconds and suffering a heart attack at one point as well, and his process of actually possibly walking away from the market, and actually he didn't go and read self-help books. He went and read novels as a way of just losing himself in stories to sort of reset himself. Now, there's a wonderful lesson there that books are there, and novels are there for perhaps that purpose.
Yes,
and
that can work as a distraction. And we're really talking about an altered state, trying to develop that altered state. Yes. Yeah, I like that. I do think that altered state aspect, I'm curious, Steve. I know that you've used Sir Edmund Hillary's quote, "It's not the mountain we conquer, but ourselves," and you've related this to trading the market. Tell me more about your thoughts with this.
Okay, so, you brought up so many great points in your talk, and I love the framework you introduced. That concept of it's not the markets we conquer, it's ourselves, almost goes back to what I was saying earlier on. The idea that trading is not that difficult at its core. Okay, the difficult bit is us. Okay, something gets in the way, our own ego, as you called it, our own fears, our own concerns. And I often use the example of walking on a 4-inch beam. It's not that difficult to do when it's a foot off the ground. If that same 4-inch beam is 200 feet in the air, then it's one of the most difficult things you will ever do, and you'll probably never do it. And yet the mechanics of doing it are exactly the same as they were 1 foot off the ground. The problem is that comes into play. And that's the same in trading. And like you said, all your past traumas, they come there. Your ego comes out, which is a kind of protective, it's a metaphor, in other words, the ego, for lots of different elements of our psychology that we kind of collectively call the ego. So we have this challenge. How do we get better at walking, at taking risk, at being 200 feet high in our trading, doing the same things? Now, trauma is a fascinating topic. And one of the things we notice is that people who have suffered extreme trauma or sustained trauma throughout their lives, okay, it doesn't have to be something that we would necessarily consider trauma. So, for example, people with learning difficulties find their entire school years, traumatic, We find that they often cope with trading much better than people who've never had those extreme traumas, because they're used to the idea of failure being in their face every single day, heartbreak being in their face every single day, the world not working for them every single day. And we've had people who run programs in trading firms come back and tell us how they notice that the neurodiverse population somehow tend to cope better with risk and setbacks than those who have had, a kind of glide path through life to that point.
It's relative to our previous levels of pain. I do think it is interesting, though, if you do score trading in terms of the worst possible things that could happen to you. Like in my own life, the worst things that could possibly happen to me would be the death of my children, the death of my spouse, the death of my family, the death of my close friends. And when I look to where trading would be scored on that type of scale, trading is way, way down. It is not up there with the largest traumas of our life. So I do think sometimes when we're under pressure, we put things into a different category. We upgrade their priority, and it isn't actually appropriate. So sometimes taking that step back, realizing where trading actually does fit in our life can be very helpful. And that's what you're talking about here too, Steve.
Yeah, because what happens is the market kind of pulls us in and we lose perspective. And suddenly we then start catastrophizing. You know, and I've seen this again with a lot of clients who go down this road of, this is the worst thing that's ever happened to me, and this is the worst thing that's ever going to happen to me. Now, that's not true, but it's playing out in their head. And therefore, their ability to function just collapses. Their ability to be effective, which is the most important thing, just collapses. You know, so if people have had what you described, we notice they cope much better with it, because no matter what happens in the market, it's not the worst thing that happens in their life, and that is locked in there. So maybe that's why. But going back to your point, you know, we all suffer trauma, even if people have had a glide path. You know, trauma is part of growing up. That's how we kind of learn. That's how we developed. That's how we develop resilience. That's how we learn to adapt. And those traumas will always play out, like you said. So it's great having a method like that. One thing I would like to say, though, about that, because a lot of people that I coach, particularly in the professional world, they also work with psychotherapists quite often on that side of how they are. You know, they see it as really helpful, really important, you know, to help them maintain balance, to bring these things out, to describe what you've described. And I think this is one of the biggest failings of the trading world and people going into trading, is to think they could do it on their own. Because, I mean, even that map, which is brilliant, it's better having something than nothing. But you're actually better going to a professional and doing it with them and seeing that not as a cost, but as an investment.
And it's got to be the right professional as well, somebody who has a broader understanding about how to help you through those hurdles. And I want to actually ask you, Steve, because I think it's quite related. I know that a lot of your work has been talking about closing that behavioural gap between theoretical perfect performance and where the trader is actually situated right now in terms of their actual performance. And I like the formula that you put forward at one stage. You said that performance equals potential less interference. And what we're talking about here could be considered interference. But tell me more about this. I'd like to hear your views about that formula.
Okay, so that's the Tim Galway formula, which I don't know if you've read The End Game of Tennis.
No.
It's a brilliant book. It was kind of the foundational book for coaching, written in 1974. And he introduces that formula in there. It's a very similar formula that, you know, we have potential, which could get better, and our system is within that potential as well. Our knowledge, our capability, our self is there. And then the interference is often the ego element. You know, that nervousness, that anxiety, that trauma. And for me, it's working on both together. If you just work on your weaknesses and the negative aspects, okay, you're just going to fail slowly. You've also got to learn to understand your strengths, your greatness almost, because everyone has a greatness. Everyone has an aspect of themselves that is incredibly capable, and we don't look at that often. We often, I hear people going, I just want to sort out my weaknesses.
And it's on the assumption that you're okay if you do that you're great. But actually, you're not learning to leverage what you're really strong at. And we all have that. And we often don't value it. So what I really love to do when I coach people is to really get them to see their strengths. I encourage them to keep a journaling tool called a 3-3-1. And it always starts with 3 questions. What did I do well? What 3 things did I do well, either today or this week or this month? Because the most important thing is to focus on your strengths, your positives, and to recognize them. Because we always go to the negatives first. Then you can look at what 3 things could I have done better? And that's the negatives, but phrased in a positive way. And then finally, there's what 1 thing do I need to work on going forward? Well, you bring in just 1 thing, because focusing on 3 or 4 things at once it's not helpful. Let's just focus on 1 thing. And eventually that 1 thing will start appearing in the top one. What 1 of the 3 things I did well. Okay? And then you can start to focus on something else. So this is a repetitive process. But I really want people to look at both their strengths and their weaknesses. How can I get better at what I'm doing? How can I develop my potential?
I do like that. And for everybody from my podcast, talkingtrading.com.au, listen to the similarities, because these 2 guys have got a completely separate background from me and from Chris Tate, but we are approaching this with a scientific mindset, gathering data and making slight changes before we lead to improvement. Now, Mark, I know I'm surprising you with this question, but we have got a mutual listener to both of our shows, and I asked that listener for a question. What would they like solved? Now, this question is for you, Mark, and they would love to hear your views. This trader, they have had a certain amount of money to trade with, but then they've sold a property, and that entire property has been dumped into their trading capital. And all of a sudden, this trader has got what I would consider the yips, where they are gun shy. They're finding it difficult to put on trades, and they're very self-protective, and they're second-guessing themselves, and it has fouled up their trading. Mark, I'd love to hear your views about how a trader can overcome the discomfort that occurs with a big jump in equity. Even if it's not that big a jump, it's the perceived jump that we're talking about. How do we overcome the yips, Mark?
Well, it's an interesting challenge to suddenly have from a small amount to a significant amount. Of course, we don't share any investment advice in any of our podcasts or deliberations. But I think it goes back to the optimization of your state. You know, if you've got a new challenge, you've got to go in there with a clarity. You've got to go in there with a beginner's mind, which Steve and I often talk about, where actually you don't use the models of the past. You look at the challenge ahead with as much clarity as possible, with as much confidence as possible, and getting yourself into that state. And I think, meditation, I'm a mindfulness freak, so that type of stuff of managing self to get yourself into the best state possible to consider the options that are there realistically for you and the challenges ahead is very, very important. We're going back to this question of turning up on a day where there's your challenge and you say, well, what state am I? How am I? Am I in the right state to face the challenge that's ahead? If you think, well, I'm stressed, I got out of bed wrong, I didn't sleep well, then you're not going to make great decisions. So going back to physiology, rest, hydration, all those, nutrition, you've been in the best state possible, and having a method of managing self from a mental perspective, connecting with nature, meditation, rocking yourself around the kitchen to your favorite soundtrack is part of that type of process of getting yourself in the best state possible to think, okay, well, let's just look at this with fresh eyes. Because I think very often we look at things with the baggage of the past, the hauntings of the past, and they really turn our mindset into a mind that isn't a beginner's mind. It's kind of like one that's got scars on it, you know? We want to, if we have a challenge such as that, we need to get ourselves into the best state possible and maintain it. So going back to your behavioural, you know, the performance gap that we talked about a moment ago, you know, almost really analysing yourself in real time about, you know, where your levels are. You know, if you're not in a great performance state, well, going back to our lifeboat scenario, how do you recover? Because we go into the world of sports, it's about how fast it's about noticing where you are, the fact that actually I'm suboptimal, and what processes do I go through to recover to get to optimal state of performance. The very, very top sports people have solved that. So you're in this game of trading, and it is a bit of a game, then actually treating yourself as an elite performer and being conscious to that so that you have the right mental setup to look at whatever the challenge is. And it might be going from a 10,000 portfolio to a 2 million portfolio, or the other way around, or some other life challenge. The fact that you've got a methodology and a process that's actually you taking care of yourself as a starting point, it then makes those decisions easier. So you don't get the yip. You'll have less chance of getting yips. If you notice yourself getting yips, then you walk away. Then you take the dog for a walk. You go and play tennis and play golf, walk on the beach or whatever. And then you come back. And being comfortable in walking away, I think, is important. Right? This is not the right time to make that decision. And being honest with yourself. So that would be my suggestion.
I like that. So looking at your own physiology and also that self-care, that self-nurturing, so that is your starting point.
Yeah,
and then,
yeah.
Steve, how can that trader gear up into being more accepting of that larger level of risk, that larger portfolio?
Just a quick reminder that the AlphaMind podcast is sponsored by the Society of Technical Analysts, who are a brilliant member-led organisation who provide outstanding education, seminars, conferences, talks on all aspects related to price action trading, and also more expansively now towards system development and behavioural performance as traders. Do check them out. Their website is technicalanalysts.com. And we are delighted to be connected to them, and of course their brilliant home study course, which you can get a discount on through the AlphaMind website. Now back to the podcast.
Mark's 100% spot on with his summary. In fact, you know, I think the point is here that there's a multifaceted element to this. You know, one is, you know, managing that relationship with yourself and your relationship with your ego in the markets, which I think Mark was really talking about there. The other aspect which we have to remember is this individual's gone from trading at 30 feet, which he's got comfortable with. He's still going to hurt himself if he falls. Okay, he still may not survive if he falls, but he's learned to adapt to that 30 feet level and cross that 4-inch beam. All of a sudden, with the way he's done it, he's gone, right, let's go to 500 feet. And it's a very different game. Yeah, he's still probably going to have a disaster if he falls. But the mind is working differently. And what he's not done is he's not developed a new relationship or an agreement with another part of himself, which is, you know, he is the investor here in himself. He has given himself a whole load of new investment money, and he hasn't given back to the investment side of himself a mandate for how he's going to run that. It's, you know, that happens to people all the time. You know, I've had big hedge fund managers who suddenly have a load more money thrown at them because they're doing well, which just raises their stake, and they just suddenly worry. They go from looking forward to what they could achieve to looking down at how
how bad this could go. They catastrophize. Okay. So there's this element as well. I mean, you know, when you work at a fund, you get money given to you to invest, and you have a relationship. You create a mandate that goes back to the investor that explains how you're going to do this, and then you manage that money in the same way. And if you get new money, you have to think about how you're going to manage that. He creates a whole load of pressure on himself because he's not giving himself a structure or a rule base or a formula even for how he's going to do this. So this is about recreating the bargain with himself. And I talk about trading is about having a bargain with yourself. I talk about that in the book. This is so important. He's not reframed that bargain.
Actually, tell me more about your book as well. I'm sorry, Mark, I'll just talk right over you there. What was your thought, Mark?
I just want to add to that I was coaching a hedge fund manager that had this massive increase. And his problem was that his risk team kept on coming back to him with the daily variance. And because of it may have been the same percentage change as he was used to for the smaller portfolio, the fact that the percentage change on this larger portfolio was a very big, ugly number, he was getting very agitated by that, even though his percentage performance was fine. It was within his parameters. The fact that it was shown as a dollar number was really destabilizing to him. So he asked his risk people to only report back in terms of percentage change, because that's what he was benchmarking against, which desensitized that bigger picture information to him. So actually, that's quite an important point for your guest, actually. How do you measure it? Because you may be getting very sensitive to the fact that you've gone from, as Steve said, 2 foot above the ground to 500 foot. And as a consequence, the small percentage changes you get in markets at 2 foot might be, inches. But when you're up at 500 foot, it seems a lot bigger, but from a percentage point of view, it's the same. So actually, that level of sensitivity and your reaction to that is what I guess wanted to share with you.
Yeah, I'm loving that, because what you're talking about is looking at your personal triggers. So what are the triggers for success and what are the triggers for lack of safety? So for that trader that you mentioned, definitely having the physical amount, that was a lack of safety trigger, which impacted his performance. Whereas with this trader, definitely finding out, firstly, making sure that your physiological needs are looked after. Secondly, creating a mandate, as you mentioned, Steve, to organise how you're going to approach it, but also looking at what your triggers are. I think that's brilliant. And Steve, I would like to ask you about your new book. I have heard so many good things. I haven't read it yet. As you know, I've just finished writing my 6th book, and that's called Investing Psychology Secrets. So it's very akin to mastering the mental game of trading. I'd love to hear more about your book, and I'm sure that my listeners will too.
First of all, I have to make an apology to Australian listeners because they've had some distribution problems with the book in Australia. So the book is available on Audible, Kindle, and paperback. A lot of people want to get the paperback version. They've had some distribution issues in certain countries. Australia is one of them.
I have noticed that. I ordered mine a few weeks ago and it has not arrived, but I'm living in hope.
They're working to resolve that. They have told me that Dimmu, so most people are using Amazon. Dimmu, which is, I gather, a big book retailer in Australia, has got copies of the book. So if people want to go to that particular route, but eventually Amazon should be getting it. They've done a new print run. They certainly didn't do a big enough print run for Australia. And hopefully that will be resolved by the time this goes out to your Australian listeners. What is the book? So, it's really interesting. When I started trading, so my first trading experience was 1987. Okay, October 1987 to be exact.
Wow, that's auspicious.
Yes, quite a month in the market, and that that was somewhat of a shock to start with. But I was very curious that the markets were quite new then, in the sense of I know they'd been around for hundreds of years, but markets really started liberating in the sort of early to mid 1980s. Okay, we had the rise of futures markets, derivative markets, lots of different instruments all started in that period. I think we had the exchanges, the life exchange, Australian futures exchanges, all started opening around the world in that period. Banks started hiring teams of what were much younger guys with a lot more hair than this in that period. And I was taken into that. But in a way, we were all making it up as we went along. And I really wanted to sort of, what is this job? Where can I find resources on it? Where can I find books on it? What exactly is trading? And there was lots of books on technical analysis. There were books on the fundamental aspects of trading. What is an option? How do you price an option? What is a bond? How do you bootstrap and value a bond? What is a stock? What is a company? How do you value companies? There were no real books on what trading is and how to do it. In 1989, we had Jack Schwager produced Market Wizards, so that was like the first real book that gave you some insight into how people are thinking, how other people are thinking, and that became kind of my Bible to start with, as did all the Market Wizard books. But even then, it was about other people. There was nothing really about what the job is, how you do it, how you have to be when you do it. There were no frameworks, there were no formulas. And, over the years, we've had lots of great books on trading psychology, Brett Steenbarger, Van Tharp. There's been some great stuff written in that time. But I kind of wanted to write the book that I needed when I started, that I felt was, in a way, generic enough, that covered all sorts of trading, from retail traders to sort of people in hedge funds, investment banks, energy firms, power firms, that would cover that broad spectrum and would cover a theme. And as I went along in my journey from trader to coach, I did a lot of studying around fields of psychotherapy, various forms of psychotherapy. I got introduced to certain frameworks and models, which I've then taken from that field, and one in particular, which became central to the book and has become central to the work myself and Mark do, called the Cycle of Experience. I really adapted it into something called the Performance Process Cycle, which is a framework for how we cope both the external challenge of trading, the external aspects of working in markets, and how that impacts us at the same time, and how we manage that, and then how that constant reflexive process of how we are, what we do in the markets, how that comes back to affect us, how that affects how we navigate our journey through an individual trade or an individual investment process, and how we can manage that better and be more effective in trading. So there's that, and there's a few other frameworks from my time as trading sort of introduced into this book. And I tried to do so through storytelling rather than going into the mire of getting too detailed and abstract about it. So that is the book. And hopefully, some of the feedback I'm getting from people is, that they're finding that really helpful. So that is where I'm going with this. But I'd like to hear about your upcoming book as well. Maybe you could tell our audience. And what has inspired you to write so many great books on this theme?
Yeah, look, I think this should be a whole extra podcast episode. There is no doubt, Steve, I could just start and never stop. But Investing Psychology Secrets, I have spent a lot of time after my psychology degree working out what makes people tick. And of course, trading being my environment, I run people through the proverbial maze. So this is surefire, data-driven methods to improve your trading and investing. And that is the key. I'm looking at the ones that have results, because so often in the field of psychology there is a lot of woo, shall we say, things that are not scientifically backed, that become very popular but have absolutely no reason for being in any person's arsenal in terms of trading. So I've distilled that wisdom into the one book, which is very exciting. So I can't wait to share that with you in an upcoming episode. And look, really, I have enjoyed having you two so much on my show, talkingtrading.com.au. I just want to remind everybody to look at alpha-mind.net so that you can research Steve Goldstein and Mark Randall, and really every single trader that is involved with Talking Trading should be a part of the AlphaMind podcast as well, and vice versa. We cover very similar topics, sometimes completely different directions, but in terms of being able to drive you further as a trader, all three of us have that in our very heart to be able to do. So I'm just loving what you guys are doing. It's just a pleasure being on your show.
Yeah, and you know, I think what you're doing is brilliant. You know, there is this challenge, and there are so many different angles to come at it. You know, it is such a huge challenge, and I should imagine. I'm just curious, actually. I should imagine it's got a lot of similarities to the world of sport. Do you work with people in sport as well?
Yes, absolutely. That high-level performance, elite sports people, the commonalities, I think, Mark, you mentioned that a bit earlier too, the commonalities are definitely in lockstep with one another. So there is a whole section of the book, I've broken it down into 6 keys. There's a whole section on inspiration, and a lot of those inspiring events that we can take data from are sport-oriented events. So spot on, Steve, yes.
And Mark, I'm going to ask Mark a question here, because I've nudged Mark over the last couple of years at times to think about writing a book, because I think he's got so much to say from his perspective.
So we can gang up on you, Mark, you see, because this is the actual reason. Yes, this is the reason why Steve wanted me on your show.
You haven't written a book yet, Mark. If you did, off the top of your head, what would it be and how would it be structured?
Weaponizing the trader mind is something that you know, I think a lot of people have told me that's a very interesting approach to, you know, to consider yourself as a platform where you're launching yourself into the market, and the state of that and the process, the way you navigate the market from a mental point of view, and how you lead it from a defensive, to sort your defense out first, and then sort out how you're going to attack the market. Don't attack the market without sorting out your defense. And that's that process of understanding, well, what does that look like? What does it feel like? How can you create that? That would be how my book would feel, but it would also cover trading, sales, and the broader ecosystem. But yeah, it's sort of there at the moment. And thank you for the prompt, and watch this space. I'm just going to tell Steve that Louise has got 5 books, Stevie. There's 4 to go. We're looking forward to those. We've even talked about a booklet from an AlphaMind perspective, and maybe that's something we can get on with. But yeah,
that's actually a good mini step. Absolutely, I think that would be great. Mark, just on that though, the word you used was weaponize. Now, is that a metaphor for how to approach the markets, or would one be using a metaphor that involves more flow? I'm curious about the word weaponize.
Well, you hear it a lot in sport. You hear an awful lot of sport about someone's turned up with a new weapon. You know, like Nadal's cross-court left-hand driven pass is his weapon. And I think actually traders sort of relate to sport, and it's terminology that's used more and more often in sport now. And I know we have had Navy SEAL commanders on our podcast as well to understand that there is a bit of a military overlap too in terms of process and offense and defense, discipline. I think it fits the trader world very well. I think there are elements of all of those things that when you bring it together, it comes under that title of weaponized mind, something that's prepared for action, but also has a defensive plan as well as how you attack. Because it is how you attack the market, you're trading. That's how what are you assessing? Where are the threats? Where are the opportunities? What's your plan? What's your point of pulling the trigger? How do you pull the trigger? And when you've pulled the trigger, what are you then doing? And then once you've gone through that particular exercise, what are you then getting to reset yourself and to rearm and to stock yourself up for the next episode? I think there's lots of interesting things and that make for a good story. And it's, I think, quite compelling. It's all about, well, what's going to make you want to carry on reading? And I think that would be it. So there you go. It's
I'm very much looking forward to reading that entire book.
Sport is a great example of that. And, I was watching the Masters just this weekend gone, and Scott Scheffler was incredible. And he almost sort of weaponized his mind, in a sense, to destroy the rest of the film. He felt, that they were all, especially on that last day, just trying to get close to him. And then just his consistency and his brilliance and not sort of getting distracted by that forced them each into a single error at some point that just saw them drop away from the field, and it just kept going. And it was just like almost a masterclass in that having a recognized mind.
He almost looked like he was part of a crowd that just happened to be playing golf. He was unfazed and just acting normally and very calm and collected. Yeah.
And everyone else at some point just made a move on him, and that caused him to slip back 2 or 3 shots. And it was just watching that was like incredible.
Well, you've just been wonderful to chat with, guys. Thank you so much for coming on to talkingtrading.com.au, and I'm very much looking forward to listening to the next episodes that you have in mind for AlphaMind, the podcast, but it's alpha-mind.net for everybody looking to follow along.
And of course, we're delighted to have Louise on with us today, and in this simultaneous first ever podcast.
Oh, really? Oh, good.
We've kind of interviewed each other on the journey, which is actually quite unusual for us. But I think it's brought out some very interesting themes. So we're really grateful. And to find you, it's your particular URL and Twitter.
So you can come to the Talking Trading podcast, which is talkingtrading.com.au. But if you'd like your own trading plan template, I can give you mine for free. So my other website is tradinggame.com.au. Come to tradinggame.com.au and register, and I'll send you my free e-course, which is called Trading Made Simple, as well as my trading plan template.
Okay, that's brilliant. And can you just repeat for our audience the website? We'll put all that in our show notes as well. So if anyone's listening to this, just check out.
Yes, absolutely. So the podcast is talkingtrading.com.au, and the other website to pick up the trading plan template is tradinggame.com.au.
Thank you for listening to the AlphaMind podcast today. We also want to extend a thank you to our podcast sponsor, the Society of Technical Analysts. Do check out their brilliant home study course, and you can see more about that at our website, alpha-mind.net. And of course, if you're keen to know more about how AlphaMind can help you, please do also look up further details of our services on our website, or reach out to us at info@alpha-mind.net. That just leaves us to say thank you, and we wish you the best of luck in the weeks ahead.